and good evening. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And we have some questions from the community, which is a great relief to me because, it's coming on these things and deciding what we want to talk about on any given day is not always easy. And, well, there's always something to talk about, but finding something to talk about and stay positive about it is the tricky part. Like we had an article in the B today about state misspending money on masks and stuff. And it's very easy for someone like me to come on here and create a rant about that. But we've been trying to avoid that type of negative politics here. And so when we have questions from the community that I can sit there and ask, and I can sit here and answer, it's a much more positive experience for me, and I hope it's a more positive experience for you. And before we begin, we still do need a few dollars to get to the finish line. So if you can go to justforassembly.com and donate a few bucks, we would appreciate it if you have it. Okay, we'll move on. So the question is about, now you guys know I don't work from a script. This is just notes because I'm blind and I couldn't read it if we put it on the screen. Family safety net. How do we plan to make it possible for more adults to own homes? Well, the concept of the family safety net is as much a mindset as it is a policy. Before we can talk about policies to encourage this, we have to talk about changing the mindset away from buying a house as a short-term investment, for your retirement or for, so you can sell and move to another house a few years later. We have to change the mindset to it's a generational investment. It's not an investment in just you. It's an investment for your grandchildren, for the future. And finding a specific policy proposal to do that is not really the point. The point is we have to change the policies that do exist that are encouraging this kind of churn behavior. This churn behavior and rapidly rising property values. It's good for the tax collector. It's good for those who work in the realty industry, but it's been disastrous for many of our lower income communities. People from out of town, they move into a place that's low income because the houses are affordable. But then where do these people go? We need stable property values that maybe inflate with the overall cost of inflation. We don't want these rapidly spiking property values. It's damaging to our culture. It's damaging to our society. What we want is stability. The point of a family safety net is that you've built roots in a community that goes back generations. And that builds strong communities. So it's not about changing any specific policies. Those will come as mindsets change. It's about changing the mindset. And someone has to start the discussion, and it has to start here. Okay. Personal income taxes are too high in California. How do you plan to reduce state taxes? Well, you can't reduce taxes until you reduce the size and scope of government. We simply have asked our government to do too many things, and they don't do any of it well. And so by reducing the scope of it, we can actually do the handful of things that we all want it to do well. We all want fire protection. We all want police. We all want our roads done properly. And those things seem to be the last things to get funded. While pet political projects like, a high-speed rail get funded despite the fact that it's no longer what they promised. And so the way to reduce taxes isn't about reducing the tax rate now. It's about, again, changing mindsets so we stop asking the government to do far too many things. Let's ask them to do a handful of things so they can do those things well and let the people deal with the rest. Because the people of California are a wondrous people when they are allowed to be it. They are ingenious. They come up with solutions that nobody could ever have imagined. But when we're hamstrung by regulations, when we've decided that the government should be doing it and so we don't do it. If the government, if society says, well, that's the government's job, but the government isn't doing it, but it's the government's job, it's not going to get done. So if the government isn't doing something well, let's ask them to stop doing it and let's find a way to make the communities do it themselves. Or to allow the communities to do it themselves. Because I think that is our key to reducing the size and scope of government, is allowing communities and individuals to take care of these problems on their own. Okay. Do I support ending qualified immunity and making police officers get personal liability insurance? Yes. And whether it's personal liability insurance or whether it's group insurance through like the unions or something of that nature, I don't particularly care what the solution is, but taxpayers shouldn't be funding their abuse. It's kind of perverted that a citizen gets abused by the police and then his tax money goes to pay him off. It doesn't seem right, just on its face. And qualified immunity was never made by law by legislatures. It was invented by a court. And so it's been far perverted past what any useful it may have. There is a use where you don't want someone, either be it a police or a government worker, to be overly responsible for an honorable mistake. But human rights abuses aren't honorable mistakes. And I think that's the difference. Second Amendment, views on Second Amendment. Describe how I'd work to allow freedoms such as open carry with little or no restrictions. Well, the Second Amendment was not invented so we can shoot deer. It was invented so we can protect ourselves from personal threats and threats from our government. And so the Second Amendment should not be messed with, and it should actually be better honored. But the reality is, here in California, the best we can likely hope for, at least in the short term, is to try and hold our ground. The chance that we get an open carry in California is slim to none within the next 10 years. It's just not going to happen. We have to change a mindset. And so the work is to hold the ground where it is now and re-educate Californians on the general purpose. And we also have to be careful because areas like Los Angeles and San Francisco have different needs than places like Shasta County or even Rio Linda. And so when we do think about coming up with issues of violence and gun violence, we've had issues of gun violence here in Sacramento just this week. In these last 10 days, we've seen it. But you don't solve that by banning the gun, especially when you can go buy it out of a damn trunk of a car. I mean, I can go down the street in my neighborhood. I live in Oak Park. I can buy a gun out of the trunk of my car with relative ease. So banning the gun isn't going to solve anything. You have to solve the reasons people are being violent. And so our commitment to the Second Amendment must be strong, but we have to re-educate the public on why it exists. Okay. What recommendations of actions or laws you make to manage the wildfires? Well, managing the wildfires is simply about being better prepared. We've known for decades that we were going to have this problem, and for some reason we're not prepared. And it's not like we don't spend enough money. So we've been spending our money wrong. I mean, we know how to do brush clearance. We know how to do pre-managed fire breaks. We know how to put in fire roads. We know how to have, a fast strike helicopter force. We can contract with them. We don't even need to buy the helicopters. There's ways to do this. We just need to start thinking out the box and actually spending our money wisely rather than whatever the hell we've been spending it on the last 2 decades. Okay. How do I think the coronavirus should have been handled? Well, that's an interesting question because at the current moment, with the current state of the science, it's fairly clear that places like Sweden have something that is closer to what should have been done. But I do want to give a bit of slack to our leaders because early on we didn't have good data. And so the fact that they chose the path they chose is not... It's understandable. While I disagreed with it at the time because, you every solution, you base it on human freedom. You base it on human rights. And a lot of our actions in fighting coronavirus have violated our basic human rights. And that's just fundamentally wrong. I don't care what the problem is. And now that we have data and we see that Sweden isn't having the second wave and the second upkicks and all these places who engage in lockdowns, every time they start to loosen up, their numbers shoot back up again. And the reality is the only way through coronavirus is through it. And it's true, you want to make sure it doesn't go through the population so fast that it overwhelms the medical system. That is the only reason we should be having lockdowns. But you do need to give the population the proper information so they can make rational choices. Because, in a crowded spot, if you're on a bus, you should wear a mask. You probably shouldn't go to sporting events and places where large crowds are in confined areas. Those are things we probably shouldn't do. And even Sweden banned events over like 50 people. But their bars stayed open, their restaurants stayed open, they didn't have any mask mandates, and they don't even wear masks on their subways and their buses. And yet they now have a lower death rate and a lower infection rate than most of the rest of the world. But we didn't know. And so whenever we start making proclamations about this coronavirus, I think we should all be very careful about how sanctimonious we are. And we shouldn't be wagging our moral fingers. I was right and you were wrong. That's not the way we get through this. We get through this by looking at the data and being kind. And the data says we probably made a mistake with the lockdowns, or at least as heavy as they've been, because they didn't allow us to get through this as quickly as we could. And that had its own disastrous side effects with increased suicide rates, economic devastation, cultural and societal devastation. We didn't factor those in. And so we need to have, in the future, we need to have more sophisticated analysis of what we are doing. Because this sole focus on public health, we forgot that suicide rates are public health. We forgot that economic devastation comes with an increased rate of suicide. We forgot that cultural devastation has its own emotional and mental health costs, and we just never factored those in. And these should have been. Okay. Funding body cameras is fine. They already have the money for it, so it's not a problem. If you need to find some money, you can demilitarize a bit and find some body cameras. I'm cool with that. And just to mention, I'm perfectly fine with political body cameras. So, you guys want to put a camera on me, I'm perfectly fine with it. No-knock warrants. Yeah, no-knock warrants put not just the public at risk, they put our police officers at risk. For what? For evidence? Are we really putting evidence above the lives of people? When did we make this choice, and why the hell did we do it? The repercussions of the drug war are just immense. We've lost our humanity somewhere along the way. This desire for engineering society, we've lost our humanity. And things like no-knock raids are an example of that. Okay, now we've got some yes or no for each of the following immigration questions. Making it harder to hire H-1B visas. No, I don't think we should make it higher because it doesn't actually solve the problem. The problem with H-1B visas is that we're not properly educating our kids here. I don't want to punish some kid who's chasing his dream from India because we can't properly educate our kids here. Let's educate our kids here so our companies don't go to India looking for brain power. Okay, the border wall. Border walls exist around the world. This moral outrage we have over this all of a sudden is kind of amusing. But at the same time, it's mostly a boondoggle. Increasing the border wall or doing anything but kind of repairing it, extending it is kind of a boondoggle. It's political theater. The real solution is to create a workable immigration system. We could do it 100 years ago, where we could handle mass immigration and get them processed and out in 3 days. And why we can't do that now is beyond me. Well, it's not beyond me. It's we don't have the political will, because the politicians want it as a political football. They don't care about those kids. They don't care about those families. They care about the politics, and it's gross. Okay. Can you get that door? block illegal immigrants from becoming eligible for taxpayer-funded welfare, healthcare, and free college tuition. I'm not a fan of blunt solutions like this, um, but the reality is if we had a working immigration system, we probably wouldn't need taxpayer-funded tuition, taxpayer-funded welfare, and quite frankly, I believe that everybody should have catastrophic health care coverage. I don't care who you are, where you come from. It's just every human being in the United States should have catastrophic health care coverage. It's the morally right thing to do. It's not a constitutional right, it's not a human right, but it's morally right. We have enough money, we have enough resources, and we already have the systems in place. We just have to change the way we think about providing health care. And in terms of welfare and free college tuitions, if we didn't make life so expensive here in California, we wouldn't need welfare for immigrants because most of them come here to work. And, if we focused on making college affordable, it wouldn't be an issue either. I mean, the only reason we have issues with college tuition is because the cost of college has exploded. You can go to online college for about $7,000 a semester. It's $14,000 a year, and FAFSA covers most of it. College doesn't have to be expensive anymore. And in fact, places like Google and Tesla no longer require college degrees because what they're learning is, in programming anyway, college actually limits people's ability to think outside the box. Quite literally are teaching people inside a box, and modern programmers need to have a different skill set. So, I don't know. As a taxpayer, I don't like the idea of tax money going to illegal immigrants on welfare, but it's also, there's so much other places to draw battle lines. That's not really a place where I want to draw a battle line right now. Mandatory deportation of non-citizen gang members, assuming they are convicted and have served their time. I'm good with that. Dismantle human trafficking networks. I don't know any person who is not for dismantle human trafficking networks. So yes, the question is, how do we do that? And the way we do that is by legalizing sex work. Legal occupations are easier to monitor. They're easier to see what's going on. There's less dark places to hide. The black market is a dangerous place for people, and we should get sex workers out of the black market, and we'll have less human trafficking, and then we will be able to find it easier when it does exist. And then they're not forced underground into the underground economy. The more legal we can make life, the better off we all are. And let's face it, prohibition of sex work hasn't worked in all of human history. What makes us think we're going to figure out the solution to that now? Let's make it legal. It doesn't mean it's desirable. It doesn't mean we think it's a good idea to engage in it. But let's make it legal so we can protect these people. These men and women who engage in sex work, they are men and women. They are humans. And they work in a dangerous industry, and they deserve our help in protecting them. And help them find a way out when they're ready or when they want. Okay. And sanctuary cities like Sacramento and Sacramento County. Well, that's an interesting question because that goes to localism. And quite frankly, local cities should have the rights to make kind of these decisions. We have a Republican form of government for a reason. That if a city or a state doesn't like a policy, they can do things like create sanctuary cities. As much as we don't like sanctuary cities over immigration, but maybe you like sanctuary cities when it comes to the lockdown. And if we take the right away to create a sanctuary city over immigration, then we're going to take the right of them for to have a sanctuary city over the lockdowns. And so I want to protect communities' right to make their own moral stance. And so no, I'm not for removing sanctuary cities. But that doesn't mean taking that stance doesn't come with consequences. If higher forms of government want to withhold funding, then they have that right as well. These competing rights, they do exist. And if you make a decision, that decision has consequences. And so if you're going to make that call and say, we want to be a sanctuary city, if the feds of the state says, okay, but you're not going to get this money because of that, then you have to be prepared for that. And I think the state and the feds have to be prepared to call them on it, if they so choose. Okay. Prohibit American companies from replacing U.S. citizens with lower-cost foreign workers. Well, if we integrate our foreign workers into American culture, then they're no longer low-cost foreign workers. So that's the solution to that. So then it doesn't actually benefit the companies to go looking elsewhere and bring workers here. That's really the solution. The solution isn't to create prohibitions. Because we're living under this mandate and command and control system, and it's breaking. Our government and our culture is breaking because we're trying to dictate every aspect of our lives. And so creating a law that says you can't bring workers in because whatever reason is probably not a great idea. But if you are going to bring workers in, and integrate them into the United States society, they're no longer going to be foreign workers, and they will demand the same rate as everybody else, and so they're no longer cheap. And so the question is, how do we educate foreign workers to demand the same respect that United States workers demand? Require new immigrants to be able to support themselves financially. I believe they already are, or at least have a sponsor, at least for a short period of time. So I think that's not really a relevant question, but I don't think anybody has much of an issue with that. I think, refugees or people who are fleeing disastrous locations. I mean, I get the thing, you don't want them on taxpayers, you don't want taxpayers supporting people. But at the same time, if our government is the reason they can't support themselves, don't we have an obligation to help? So maybe the question isn't to require that they can take care of them financially. Maybe the answer to that question is, let's remove barriers to people taking care of themselves financially, and it's not a problem. I mean, life in California is insanely expensive, and it's insanely complicated, and things like AB5 have restrict people's ability to easily make money. And if we remove those barriers, then restrictions aren't required. I don't like restrictions. I don't like putting on a bunch of laws. I don't like putting on a bunch of requirements. It doesn't solve problems. It just creates new ones. Okay, family court reforms. Automatic 50-50 custody. Well, I'm not going to go with automatic, but it should be the default position. I mean, things go wrong in families, and there's people who shouldn't have custody. And so those things occasionally need to be worked out. But it should be a default position until something is proven otherwise. But also we need to rethink how we do divorce, because this automatic adversarial divorce system is toxic to families. And so we really just need to reconsider the whole process we use for divorce. I mean, the court process should only be for the most acrimonious cases. Everybody else should go through mediation and see a judge almost never. Okay, mandatory DNA testing at birth. No, it's not necessary unless there's a question. Financial abortion. Can men sign parental rights away if women can abort children? That's a good question. I say no. Sometimes life ain't fair, but it's actually a fair question. If women can have an abortion for financial reasons, but yet the man is still stuck with the financial burden and doesn't have a choice, that's actually a fair question. Now, life isn't fair. And so, sometimes it's just the way it goes. But it's a good discussion to have. Because these kind of cultural discussions, these discussions that are competing moralities, we can never stop having them. And that's what this is. This is an issue of competing moralities. And while I may line up one place and someone may else line up another, you know, none of us are as right as we like to think we are. Child support values system. Other factors besides money factored in support. Yeah. But again, this is about if we create a mediation system where families can get together on their own and make these decisions as much as possible without the intervention of courts, families will be much better off. Right to prior law style post-divorce. Well, you're getting divorced. Anybody who thinks they should get their previous lifestyle after you divorce is not being realistic. But at the same time, there is a period of time where if one person has more financial means than the other person's, there is a moral obligation to take care of them for a while they get back on their feet. Now, that does not necessarily mean if someone's used to having $1 million a year, they have to get $1 million a year or something equivalent. No, $100,000 or something like that would be perfectly fine, and that you can live a perfectly nice life. You know, if you divorce means divorce. But also in California, it's a 50-50 property state, community property. And so anything they built together, they split down the middle. And so this is one of these things where it really only matters when someone with large financial means engages in a relationship with someone with none, and it doesn't last, 5-6 years, and they haven't built anything. And so the number of cases is shrinking where this is really a problem, but it is a problem. And so we have to be careful because we don't want people destitute on the streets because of a divorce, but at the same time, you shouldn't have to write a check for the rest of your life to someone you divorced decades ago. So there is there's some room in there between these things where you should expect someone to get back on their feet. But, if you have the financial means, you should make sure they have that opportunity. Okay. Require child support management reports. Oh, God, no. We don't need the government interjecting people in their child support management questions. That's just not what we need to do. There's times when it's a really acrimonious thing, I suppose, if it has really disintegrated. Punishing false accusations harshly. I'm not a fan of using cages for nonviolent crimes, but it is a crime, and we should be dealt with. Something like community service is probably a better solution than putting people in cages, but we can't do nothing. But it also has to be proven false accusations, because then it has to go through their own court process, and it becomes a mess. So there's no silver bullets to this whole family court system. And part of this problem is that it's the adversarial system. And when dissolving a family is probably not the best way to do it. Abolishing the Duluth model assumes the metals of abusers in assault case. Well, that's actually a good one to end with on what is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Studies have shown that the rates of domestic violence are about equal between men and women. Women face a greater physical danger, and men face a greater long-term emotional danger, is kind of where the science is leading us at this point. And so for the courts, when this tragic event, this tragic thing comes in front of you, it's a very difficult thing to try to decipher. Because, is pushing someone's buttons until they snap, is that abuse? It's a good question. And how do we unwind all that? And we're asking a judge to do it and figure out what's best for the kids. There is no good answers here. And I think that's the reality of it. The reality is we have to do a better job at protecting people from predators. And, sometimes just mitigating the worst is the best we can do. But what we can do in spirit of Domestic Violence Month is that we can figure out how to short circuit domestic violence. We can get people help earlier on, get them emotional support. If we interject a small investment of, say, $100 a month directly to a counselor, we can get people into this system where they are in self-respection and violence doesn't have to happen. Because most domestic violence is people without tools getting overly emotional. And then they build a pattern, and then that pattern becomes abusive. If we can short circuit that, we can do a lot of good. We can save people's lives. We can save people's families. We can help detoxify our society. A simple emotional health system where payments go directly to counselors can do a hell of a lot of good in preventing a lot of emotional and mental health issues. When we see emotional and mental health issues on our streets with our homeless problems, we see it with our increased suicide rates. And yet, all leaders do is talk about spending money on these big programs, and they don't understand that these hoops you have to jump through to become part of these programs are barriers. And so if you can get the end user to not have any barriers where they can just walk into a state-sponsored counselor who just gets their check and is certified through their association, we can do a lot of good. We can prevent a lot of domestic violence instead of responding to it. Because by the time we're responding to it, by the time it hits the courts, it's too damn late. All we're doing is cleaning up the mess. And I'm tired of doing that. Okay, and to end on a positive note, presidential candidate Jo Jorgensen is in town this Sunday. I think 5 o'clock in Roseville. You can go look around on the internet, and the announcement's easy to find. I think I'm planning to be there to give a short talk. I'm happy to have you there. You can learn about me. You can learn about the Libertarian presidential candidate. And we can maybe help detoxify our political environment. Thank you for your time. Good night, and please love everybody.